Exactly a year ago, when the pandemic forced us to suspend our everyday activities, the Goethe Institute, the French Institute, and Art Center NABI came together to hold a virtual conference, an event entitled Making Lemonade. The idea was to make lemonade if life hands you lemon. That is, to ponder about the best we can do in a given situation, what kind of creativity we can show when experiencing limitations, and what kind of collective action we can take by bringing our hearts together. The event was designed to explore and experiment these questions. We then pulled wisdom on how to overcome the problem of environmental destruction by bringing the cultural and art world together. Now we're ready to make our second lemonade. The pandemic has forced most people to work from home and ushered in a world of delivery service, resulting in a massive volume of plastic waste. The air quality might have slightly improved as people travel and produce less, but climate change, which is an existential threat, seems to be now off the policy agenda. Governments around the world are overwhelmed with problems at hand, including COVID-19 response, unemployment, and now inflation. As a result, they are gradually turning their attention away from the future of our environment and the living things, including us. And yes, I can't help but mention Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We are left helpless as the values we have long believed in, that is freedom, life, and human rights, being egregiously violated. It is indeed a distressing experience as we watch every day the horrendous violence that humans inflict on other humans on the news. Many people feel like they're having a panic attack. It is simply absurd that we see a war like this at the end of the long pandemic tunnel. It is against this backdrop that I thought about what it means to engage in culture and art. Wouldn't it be better to take out the trash on the streets or even volunteer to help the Ukrainian refugees? Is art and culture what people need now? Conclusion first. The answer is yes. We need culture and art more than ever before. This is because the culprit behind this tragedy, from environmental problems to wars, is the collapse of our spirits. Behaviors such as not treating people as equal, treating them like handling items that need to be disposed of, disrespecting other lives, abusing resources, and overspending are all due to a lack of respect for oneself. If culture and art fail to play a role for humans, we're pushed into an endless competition in a spiritless world of material abundance, the world will become very dark. Therefore, I think that culture and art have a bigger and more important role than before. In the midst of an exploding technological civilization, we need to help humans revisit the meaning and purpose of life and to show that humans can lead a happy life by embracing creativity and diversity. Human persistence, resilience, and wit, which shine brighter in adversity and hardship, will become the lemonade we make. This year, ARCO decided to join the event, which I believe will contribute in making a much tastier lemonade. Thank you. Have a great time.
Dear participants, dear audience, our contemporary world faces many crises and conflicts. Currently, we witness the terrible war in Ukraine. The devastating dimensions of the Russian attacks are already being felt around the world. Nonetheless, we must not forget that there are further pressing challenges facing our global community. War cannot stop climate change, on the contrary, and climate change affects us all. It constitutes a multi-layered challenge, and we need to work collaboratively on global and sustainable solutions. International cultural exchange can open up much needed spaces for this collaboration. It can bring different perspectives together. It can raise our awareness and promote mutual understanding. It also opens spaces for developing creative, innovative solutions. The Goethe Institute has a long-standing commitment to support a sustainable transformation based on the Agenda 2030 of the UN. With our 158 institutes across the world, we organize a broad range of international cultural encounters, offering opportunities of networking and educational programs that address questions of a sustainable future. The conference, Making Lemonade, is an important part of our work in this field. Artists and cultural actors from Korea, France, and Germany come together to share their knowledge and ideas on how to create a more sustainable agenda for and through the arts. The festival program promises exciting conversations, and I'm curious which results you will come up with. For this second edition of Making Lemonade, the Goethe Institute continues to collaborate, supported by the French-German Cultural Fund, with the Cultural Service of the French Embassy to South Korea. And I'm particularly happy that our highly esteemed Korean partners, Art Center Nabi, and for the first time this year, the Arkuk Arts Council Korea, join this Franco-German cooperation. The Goethe Institute is very grateful to work with such wonderful partners, and I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to everyone involved. I wish you all an interesting conference, enlightening discussions, and a forward-looking exchange.
Hi everyone, my name is Ayoung. I'm the president of the French Institute here in Paris. I took over the presidency of the French Institute last July, and ever since I took over this presidency, I took up the topic of what we do and the fight against climate change. First of all, I would like to tell you what we already do. We don't support mobilities abroad that are there only for one show in one country. We only support mobilities in a region for several countries, for several shows, and also mobilities that allow, for example, deeper cooperation with the local partners, masterclasses, projects. That is one example of what we do. The second one is that for the first time this year, we are going to measure the carbon impact of our French pavilion in the Art Biennale of Venice, for which the French Institute in Paris is the operator. This is the first time this will be done, and our objective is to reduce the carbon impact of the French pavilion by 5% every year, which means 25% over the next 5 years. So this is quite ambitious. At the same time, we really hope that this is feasible. The third thing that we do is to inform the people in the French Institute of the emergency of the fight against climate change. So we organize workshops, we organize conferences to inform the people and to make them think. Some of them are already very much convinced, and somehow for them we don't go fast enough. But I can tell you that a lot of people are not so much convinced that they should change the way they live, because basically this is about the way we live. There is no easy solution. There is no magical solution to make our activities compatible with the fight against climate change. We are thinking about the slowdown of our activities. This is one concept that is very much talked about in the French cultural sector, but we cannot slow down if we are the only one to slow down. We are thinking also about everything that we do, what we eat, what we serve in a cocktail, you know, we are thinking about the goodies. But at the end of the day, I think the main thing is to strike the right balance. We are about the dialogue of cultures. We are about international mobility. How can we strike the balance between what we do, our missions, and the fight against climate change? And no one wants a world in which we cannot talk to each other. And to conclude, I would also like to raise the issue of the digital tools, because we all think, okay, I will not take the plane because now I can be in a video with you. At the same time, we know that digital pollution is also an issue. So I can tell you at the moment, I don't have all the answers, but we are determined to move towards, you know, a more resilient activity for the French Institute. I would like to thank you very much for your attention and wish you all a big success for your seminar. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Park Jong-kwan, Chairperson of Arts Council Korea, or ARCO. ARCO, this year, together with the Cultural Service of the Embassy of France in Korea, Goethe Institute Korea, the Art Center Nabi, are co-hosting an on- and offline conference, Making Lemonade 2.0, towards a sustainable future for the arts. Thank you very much for your interest and joining us in many numbers for this event. The title Making Lemonade is inspired by the English phrase, meaning when you're given lemons, that is sourness in life, make lemonade out of it. This year's event is a follow-up of last year, which attracted more than 4,500 online participants, with the title Making Lemon Towards a Digital Future for the Arts. Our council is also very honored to take part in this meaningful event from today. Through the keywords like culture, art, sustainability, technology, and climate change, experts and artists from Korea, France, and Germany will get together to think about art for a sustainable future, and many programs are in store for you, including artist talk, panel discussion, showcase, as well as live performance. The world is now gradually returning to normal after more than 2 years of physical isolation. Our council has carried out various support projects for the artist community hard hit by COVID-19 over the past 2 years. I sincerely hope that this conference, co-organized by Korea, France, and Germany, will produce innovative ideas and approaches to discovering the image and direction for art for a sustainable future and seek new opportunities altogether. Going forward, our council, ARCO, will work with many domestic and overseas partner organizations to expand the social role of art in line with the post-COVID pandemic era. I hope you all have fun and good time during this 3-day event, and I wish you a plenty of success and happiness in life. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kwak Jaesik. I'm Professor of Environment Engineering at Sungsil Cyber University. It may look like I'm a big figure in this field, but in fact, I started teaching 2 months ago. And I started off my career as a writer back in 2006. So I can say that I have longer experience with that, but I'm no pro in literature. But I do both. So today I would like to talk about the relationship between technology and environment, as well as novels and art and climate change and so on. So the topic of my presentation today is technology of climate change and art. Now we are faced with climate emergency. You all know that. And the culprit behind that is CO2. We name CO2 the most. And how much CO2 is in the air? Do you know the answer when I was little? I felt like, well, you say that you breathe in oxygen and you breathe out CO2. So I thought that CO2 was an opposite term of oxygen. So it's about 20% of oxygen in the air. So I thought, well, about 20% of CO2 should be in the air as well. But then as I studied, that wasn't true. And what is the level of CO2 in the atmosphere is 0.04%. And this is called the killing curve. It is the record of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. It's an annual record, and this sociologist Keeling started to capture and to measure CO2 in Hawaii, and he passed away. But still, researchers after him are following his footsteps, and we're seeing the result. About 10 years ago, so that's about the early 2010s, the level of CO2 is 0.03 something ppm, if I'm correct. And if that reaches 0.04, then we cannot reverse that. It becomes irreversible, and we have to do it fast. But then we actually surpassed the threshold, and it seems like there is no way back. So what I mean by that is this. So CO2 is a cause of global warming, and the amount of CO2 from 0.03 to 0.04, that minuscule amount can make a huge difference. It's 0.01% difference. So you have about 10 grams of water, and it's about 0.01 gram of salt. And then you taste the water, and then do you think that you will be able to tell whether the water contains salt or not? So it's that minuscule, but still that can make a huge difference, and that is climate change. And when we think of this concept, climate change, we tend to overlook some of the facts, and this shows that very well. Unlike other phenomena, when it comes to climate change, it is hard to pinpoint on the problems. Why is the river so dirty? We need to clean up. We need to purify the water, and we know where to do so. Oh, the air is so polluted. Is that because of the cars? We should do something. We can feel that firsthand, and it feels like we're losing trees. It feels like we're witnessing deforestation, and you can take action. However, this 0.01% difference of CO2 in the atmosphere, you cannot feel that in your everyday life, and nobody can feel that. So when it comes to the essence of science and technology, we have a lot of researchers studying this phenomenon, and now they have agreed that this 0.01% can make a huge difference, and that all drills down to science. And that is the problem. And why does that matter to us? And I would like to connect that to another problem. I believe it is key to solving climate crisis. So this climate emergency is not felt in our everyday life because of the reasons that I mentioned. And we come up with different solutions, and we hear many warnings about climate change. But still, when we think of climate change, it is this vague notion. And you do not feel that it is an existential threat. Of course, it is an existential threat. However, you can't really feel it in your everyday life. We do know that it is a serious problem. But then, although we are concerned about climate change, this feels very vague, and it seems very distant. In a way, we talk about renewable energy, electrification, hydrogen power, and so on. We talk about all these technologies, but still, about the essence of climate change, sometimes we lose grasp of it. What I mean by that is this. Bees are disappearing, and I'm sure that you heard that on the news. So about 6 billion bees disappeared in Korea. You heard that on the news, and climate change is a reason behind that. And when we talk about that, and then what follows is this story. Oh, well, we won't be able to see any more flowers blossoming. We will lose our environment and nature, and no bees means no humans. Maybe we will go extinct. And people imagine the future. But then, well, we need to increase the tax because of this climate emergency, and we need to stop the climate villains. But we tend to focus on the existing ideas. Well, the bees are disappearing. It's a fact. And who are hit the hardest? Well, the beekeepers. Those beekeepers were hit the hardest because they cannot sustain their livelihoods. They need bees to make ends meet. And those who grow fruits, they cannot make ends meet. They cannot support themselves. And now they're indebted even more because they have to pay back their debt. And that is the result of climate change. Then, well, we tend to look to a very distant future, but now we have to look at what we should do to those around us. And we know that climate change is alarming. We have the awareness of that. And insects as well as bees, their atmosphere is changing. We all know that. Now we need to raise our own level of awareness to conduct studies. For instance, I talked about the bees. That's a problem in Korea. Then maybe we should conduct more research and invest more in those research about bees and why they disappear. Well, sometimes we have pesticides that are the cause behind the bee disappearing. Maybe it's because of the global warming. And now we have migratory birds now flying to Korea, unlike in the past, because of the changing weather. And now we see signs of climate change here in Korea as well. Now those studying tropical zones and the insects in those areas, how much they are investing and how we are preparing for any potential damages. So those are some of the problems that we need to look into and study. So this is a present challenge. It is a challenge in our own hands that we need to deal with immediately. Now, given that, let's turn our attention to this. Climate change adaptation technology. This is an example. I'm sure that you know this structure. It's the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And the Eiffel Tower is made of puddled iron. It's very tall, and very strong iron was used to make the Eiffel Tower. And it uses this linear structure, which serves as the basis of the architectural design. At the same time, what it does is that it connects to the top with immense arched legs, and it curves inward until joining in a single tapered tower. And people look at the Eiffel Tower and they say, wow, this is beautiful. And back in 1889, when this was first built, this harmony between linear lines as well as curved lines, of course, that was one notion behind the design. But to build this, how did they bring in all those tons of iron? That was also relating to technology. Now, the steel that was used here is not the one that we use today. The material was a little bit different because the steel that we use now was only recently developed. So when it comes to cast iron, carbon content is too high, so it breaks easy. But before, what they used was puddled iron. Puddled iron has a very low carbon content. which means that with a lot of pressure on top, it will only bend slightly and not break down completely. And back then, well, the Eiffel Tower was the centerpiece to boast such technology. And before that, there was this building. Do you know this building? It's no longer there. It's the Crystal Palace in London. It no longer exists, but as you can see, well, stones and wood are barely used in this structure. They used cast iron and plate glass structure. So what that means is that it has light everywhere and is transparent. Everywhere that you go, you will see light, which means that you did not require interior lights here. And it had artistic value back then. But on the other hand, this was a huge building. And it meant that they had the technology, the techniques to manufacture as many plate glasses as possible. So the building was made to boast such technique. I would like to talk about one more building. So this is the Chrysler Building, which was the tallest building until the Empire State Building and was built back in 1931. And the Art Deco style can be seen throughout this building. And as you can see, we have the top here, which uses steel, very elegant, but at the same time, it really shows exuberance. And you see the powerful design of the architecture, the material. So this building just went on forever to the sky. And it featured luxury and technological progress of concrete and steel materials. And concrete breaks easy, and it can be fragile. So if you use steel only when constructing a building, it does not break easy. But when you receive pressure, then it can simply split in half. And now, because these two materials can complement one another, the building was able to boast the design of the time and their technological progress. And the Chrysler Building was a monument that showed that. And climate change is about reality as well as technological change. What does that mean? What I would like to say today is this. So this is the conclusion. So this is a topic that is in my mind these days a lot. And we hear a lot of criticism about that, but with the advent of the 21st century, with local autonomy gaining power, we saw the rise of many local governments in Korea. And what those local governments did was this. Oh, we are now building this city, so let's build up this center or this complex, government complex. And what happens then? And then the governor or the head of the government will infuse their ideas and their preferences into the building, into the structures. So let's say, I visit this place and the building looks like a wave. And that's because the governor at the time loved waves and wanted to really grow further and navigate further just like a wave. And that was his mission. And I'm sure that you have one or two experiences of such. Now we see erection of buildings based on such philosophy. But then when building such monumental buildings, we tend to rely on personal preferences. Now what we need to do is something else. If there is a spirit that we need to include in the construction of buildings, is climate change. I'm not saying that we should construct a building that looks like a polar bear. What I'm saying here is that, well, global warming is an existential threat. Then, well, summer will become hotter. That means that we need to build buildings that where people can have cooler summers and warmer winters. And winters can become very cold. And if you heat up the building, then you will only contribute to global warming. Then let us use some design or some materials that emit less CO2. And then with that in mind, the building design will follow. And sometimes the building may not be pretty, but still, at the time of climate change, when you see more snow, more rain, then the buildings will be able to weather such adversities better. And maybe if you reflect the solar design better, then the building will be able to become more sustainable throughout climate change. So sometimes some structures they use very unique designs and very odd color. And that's because by using such materials, then you will be able to use less energy and produce less waste because of the insulation material or so on. So let us create buildings and embed these features in those buildings. And by doing so, we will be able to send out the message that these buildings are very eco-friendly and want to fight global warming. Thank you very much. That would be all for me.
Hello everyone, I am art critic Kyunghan Hong. So I will be moderating this short discussion session following Professor Kwak's presentation. So globally, we are opening up the future of uncertain Anthropocene, following up on Holocene. This is the world that we are living in today. And in the artistic community, we are fully aware of this problem, and we're not just stopping at grieving. We have this firm belief that mankind and nature are one. So we are constantly thinking about how to harmonize between mankind and nature. And there are lots of campaigns being held calling for civic action on climate change. And a lot of galleries are going towards zero waste, not emitting any wastes. This means that we should not turn a blind eye to the relationship between art and climate change, and this sort of reflects the efforts that are being made by the artistic community. So the presentation's title, Technology of Climate Change and Arts, done by Professor Kwak, is very much related to the efforts made by the artistic community, I believe. So I would like to ask a few specific questions so that we can go on with our discussions. So you mentioned about the example of Eiffel Tower and also the building in Crystal Palace in London and another building in New York. So in order to improve the excellence of artistry, technology was also needed. It was a must. This is how I understood. And ultimately, the presentation that you showed us raises a question. What's the relationship between art and climate change. So nowadays we're talking a lot about green buildings and green construction, and I believe that we can think about moving towards more greener buildings and greener architecture. But I prepared some questions to ask to Professor Kwak. So you mentioned about climate change and architecture, but how are these two elements related?
Well, out of the many dimensions of art and fields of art, architecture is the one that affects climate change the most. And literature has very little climate footprint or environment footprint, carbon footprint, because you only need pen and pencil to write. Drawings and sculptures may produce more CO2, but then when it comes to huge buildings, it requires space, materials, as well as the machinery that generates a lot of CO2. So carbon footprint is very high. So compared to other types of art, its carbon footprint is immense, which is why it is very closely related to climate change, and it is an area where we can achieve much, and that's why I'm interested in this.
So in the architecture world, has there been any effort to realize what you said to improve the situation? I'm not an expert in architecture. I am more specialized in environment engineering. But 10 to 20 years ago, we talked about passive house, energy saving house, and people thought about using insulated materials to build houses. And at the time, a lot of people thought it as a restriction. So if we focus too much on insulation, then there's not much thing that we can show during the design phase because we have to focus on efficiency at best. So I think that was the prevalent idea at the time. But times have changed over the years, and there are lots of movements and efforts being made to show out-of-the-box approaches and new things. And I think that's where the technological development and art converge. Because in the past, traditional Korean houses were made out of wood. So we actually focused a lot on the design of the roofs and so forth. But nowadays, the traditional houses or hanoks are made out of like steel. And things do evolve over the years. So we are now faced with climate change issues. So we have to seek aesthetics that are in line with the current climate change crisis. Yes, so when it comes to climate change, yes, we are aware of all of these things, and the more we become aware of it, architecture will evolve with it. And I think art may be like a separate field. So whether something is artistic or environmental friendly, of course, if we can have both of them, that would be good. But I think there is another layer of interpretation that we can have regarding art. And there are also technological advances in terms of architecture. And architecture, if it's considered as art, then architecture should also evolve with the change of the times, including the climate change. So I would like to move on to the second question. So Professor, I read your book, and you mentioned a lot about like cyborg and robots and AI. You conducted a lot of studies regarding these topics. So how do you think technology should relate to the environment for a sustainable environment?
That's a very difficult question. I can't give you a clear-cut answer, but I would like to just share my feelings or impression. When I'm writing novels, sometimes I tend to think about these chains of technologies that are developed. and the relationship between the two. So to protect the environment, we need to stop developing technology and vice versa. But then, when you think of Korea, for example, I don't know whether you know this, but in late Joseon dynasty, when we were colonized by Japan, in Namsan, we didn't have many trees because they had to use it as fire. Now, at the time, we did not have many trees, but now we have trees, and we take it for granted. And you see trees all over the city, and that's thanks to the science and technology. And at the same time, people work hard to plant trees. And back in 80s, a lot of people, if you remember back in the 80s, the water of Han River was so dirty. But then with the purification technology, it got cleaned up. And now if you look at fine dust, back in late 90s, fine dust was a huge problem. Now we are controlling fine dust better than in the 90s. Sometimes we do misuse technology, and that damages our nature. That's quite shocking. But I think they two go together. We need to have advances of technology to protect our environment. We need to understand how much carbon should be curbed so that we can protect our environment. So that 0.01% that I talked about, and we need to be able to identify that first. So please keep that in mind.
So in order to seek solutions to climate change, technological developments is a must, right? Yes, I do think so. That's what I research at school and university. So I do believe that. Okay, I think we have some more time, so I'm going to ask you another question. You are an environment engineer, you're also a novelist. So in order for a sustainable future, sustainable environment, what are some of the things that culture and art should explore going forward? What is the path that culture and art should take? I'm an artist, so I'm very much interested in your answer.
Well, we need to do well, and I need to write well. I do not have the right answer, but I talked about climate change, and that's a reality. That was my message. So it's tangible, it's a reality, and we have to look at the problems in that context. Now, we talk about art of the environment. If we think of literature and art, then the same applied to me as well, but we used to copy existing literature. For instance, you have like the goddess of land, but then people got greedy and the goddess got sick, and at some point now they revenged, and that was pretty much it. There were many stories like that. I'm not saying that that story is not good. It was enough to raise an alarming bell to people. However, climate change is a reality, as I said. So now what comes up to my mind is this. The cabbage price dropped, and we have this high altitude cabbage that we sell in Gangwon-do in Korea, and it's a local food in Gangwon-do. And because of the global warming, now the high altitude cabbage does not grow well in Gangwon-do, and that is the outcome of global warming. So when we talk about environmental destruction, and if we were to express that with art, it's not so much about the goddess of land, taking a revenge on people or so forth. But it's not that. It goes beyond that. You have this global warming, and because of that, you cannot make ends meet. And you have farmers that cannot support themselves. So let us look into the details of their livelihoods and their lives. And maybe we can translate that into art. And I believe we could do so today.
Yes, so as an artist, we're engaged in a creative process to be aware of climate change. And it is also very important to think about how we proceed with our creative process in combating climate change. And a lot of efforts and campaigns are happening in the artistic community. People are making online catalog instead of paper-based catalog, and sometimes the paintings are hung on a wall that doesn't use any paint. And there are also a lot of carbon saving movements taking place in the artistic community. So as Professor Kwak said, of course, we have a lot of options out there, but what is important is that we have a consensus on the fact that there is a crisis out there, and it is a common global challenge. So if we do not lose touch of that, I think that all of us in our respective field can do what we can do the best. I think that would be the best path for us to take. I have iPad with me, but there are no questions. So I believe that we will not be addressing any questions from the audience, but I would like to ask once again if there are any questions or comments. I believe not. And we have also neared the end of our session. So with that, I would like to wrap up this very lemon-like interesting discussion with Professor Kwak. Thank you very much. Hello, I am Kim Ayoung, media artist, and I am very happy to talk about my works for this very interesting conference. I'm going to talk about a virtual fictitious space called Surisol Underwater Lab, which has been the background of my media works over the past 2 years. And I'm also going to talk about the various extrapolation settings that are operating on this speculation. Extrapolation is a unique methodology, some of you know, for inserting and simulating non-realistic settings in sci-fi or speculative fiction. It is known that the setting of extrapolation often brings about the cognitive estrangement effect, which makes reality unfamiliar and new. To give you some examples of instruments of extrapolations, today I would like to talk about what's called speculative geoengineering surrounding the Surisol Underwater Lab. Surisol Underwater Lab series has the aspects of speculative fiction, which is about simulating the situation in the near future after the COVID-19 pandemic. And since the picture is worth 1,000 words, I would like to show you a video clip that my alter ego, which was sent to the lab, is transmitting. It's a 5-minute video clip. Hello, everyone. I am at 35 degrees, 5.4 minutes, 37 seconds north of Busan waters and 129 degrees, 7.3 minutes, 60 seconds east. Built about 10 years ago, this area is called Biomass Town. Behind me, can you see Oryukdo Island? The weather is very nice. If you look up at the sky, the sun is shining down. Sunlight on the skin feels very warm. Our destination is under this tentacle underwater. Shall we go together? We are now inside the lab, 15 meters below the surface of water. The use of fossil fuel has sharply dropped, and seaweed bioethanol, which is produced by fermenting giant seaweed kelp, has long been used as the world's main energy source. The Surisol Underwater Lab is a research institute that implements an integrated management of kelp farming and biomass processes and is located near deep sea of Oryukdo Island in the sea forest formed along the long belt from Kijang in Busan to Oryukdo Island. It manages kelp seed selection, growth, and development, which serves as a major source of biofuel. Can you see how beautifully the liquid in this tank shimmers? This is the number 16 bioreactor. The bioreactor is the facility that ferments the kelp into biofuel. Some people find the smell of fermenting seaweed really stinks. Take a look above you at the domed ceiling. The lab structure is built to withstand the pressure of the sea. It's fixed to the seafloor by biorock. Usually, there would be a number of international researchers working here, but this is the holiday season. Currently, there is only one person working on site, who is a senior researcher called Sohaila. When Sohaila, our senior researcher, got back to the lab earlier after a long Ramadan holiday, Surisol told her some good news and some bad news. First, the good news. There was a CO2 capture assessment by the Asian Carbon Capture and Storage Association 2 weeks ago, and they beat last year's record, and the greenhouse gas emissions were down by 1,350 tons. This means that the lab will be able to trade 11,700 greenhouse gas emissions credits. It's truly amazing news. Well, but good news always comes with bad ones. Let me show you this hologram panel. These algae are called Bangiaceae. It's a marine algae whose spores are parasitic on kelp and are also toxic. Their spores have been observed in the marine zone K92 for the first time. Now, why don't we go over to the kelp farm in F01 of marine zone K92. So here we are at the kelp farm. Can you see my tentacles wiggling like this? The water flows really fast in here, so it's very hard to stay balanced. They're really out of control. Although we can't see the sun from here, isn't it really beautiful how the kelp glitters in the sun? They're glittering. These are the kelp-growing drone boys. The lab incubates the kelp sporelings on ropes, and the position of these ropes is automatically adjusted by drone buoys suspended at both ends. The buoys find an appropriate depth of water and move around while driving a kelp net. The whole process is automated. It's a free-floating cultivation system. If you touch the kelp leaves with my tentacles, they are very wiggly and slippery. Kelp is still a delicious food ingredient, but these days they have become more valuable as a raw material for biofuels. The power of kelp is not that it emits CO2 as it grows, but it absorbs tons of carbon dioxide. It is for this very reason algae helps us to transition from biofuel production process towards zero carbon emission. Yeah, so far you've watched a video of my alter ego sent from Surisol Underwater Lab and Kelp Farm. I wish I could also wander around this under the sea. Now I'd like to introduce a VR project that I made last year, which is called Surisol POVCR. POVCR is an acronym that I made, meaning Point of View Corrosive Reality. It reminds us of the past convention of video making with words like point of view and VCR, which used to be widely used a few decades ago, but have indeed become a perished medium these days. There is another element of extrapolation in this project, which is it's called CCS, Carbon Capture Storage System, which is a specific geoengineering method widely applied everywhere on Earth these days. For me, this is truly a fearsome and provoking concept that turns the porous spaces of the Earth into carbon storage. The porous spaces are created as the Earth empties out every time we develop oil or gas fields. It does not reduce carbon emissions, but the goal is to dump and bury carbon somewhere out there that we cannot see. I'll show you a short excerpt of the VR.
Thank you for letting me move my holiday up for Ramadan. You have seen the world for the first time in a long time. But to see the world growing, even without you, we'll be able to invest everything in bioplastic production facilities. Could you send Turbo Shell? We're going to need to get out there. I haven't been out for a ride in a while. It's great.
Near the number 13 drone buoy in marine zone. The autopilot is not working.
It can't be. I don't believe it. What sort of reality are we in?
Just close your eyes and tell us first. I'll cover them to see It's better than understood. Everything's all simple, so you can live without stopping.
Yes. So this was a trailer, and as you just saw, there is the character Sohaila and the AI Surisol who talk, and their conversation hints at the symptoms generated by carbon-credit trade, energy sustainability, and extreme weather. At the end of the fiction, the small submersible vehicle wherein Sohaila and Surreal are boarded are being sucked into a strange cavern. And they examined that it might be an abandoned carbon capture facility from the past, and the facility seems to be leaking. Then the vehicle starts to become sucked into the surface of the earth and eventually into the bottomless pit in between the strata. In 2021, just last year, around the world, there were 66 facilities like this, and the Global CCS Institute announced that 40 million tons of CO2 was captured in 2021 in the underground facility. This technology is said to be utterly environment-friendly and safe. I'm sure it would be, but still, the idea of sucking the natural element like petroleum and natural gas out of the porous spaces and then injecting something else seems already very bizarre. and speculative, and it opens up speculation for me because eventually the pore spaces are to be filled with CO2. Capturing the carbon works by directly capturing carbon from the air using chemical fluids or absorbents, then shipping the carbon through cross-border pipelines to carbon storage markets. Also, it is said that blockchain technology can track the process. So this is not only an element of extrapolation of my fiction with the near future as a backdrop, but is already a functioning geoengineering. There were times when these concepts were based on speculative geoengineering, based on imagination, but they are in fact already functioning. I couldn't stop thinking about the possible future if the carbon capture storage doesn't function well. And at the end of the VR, the world surrounding Sohaila and Surisol starts to collapse, and they encounter some powerful, monstrous phenomena as if they are being observed by the inner side of the Earth. So this is the end of the presentation on my imagination and speculative geoengineering surrounding the Surisol underwater lab. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to Making Lemonade 2.0. My name is Lee Jung-ho. And we will now present some of the cases of artists from Korea, Denmark, as well as other countries. And we will learn how these artists looked at the topic of sustainability and how they unfolded their imagination surrounding sustainability. Each presenter will have 10 to 15 minutes. And once we hear from all the presenters, we will have a Q&A. First of all, I would like to introduce artist collective Bang and Lee, who will present about Gathering Moss and Act Zero. Gathering Moss gathers together various creators to share ideas and to encourage action. And Act Zero is part of climate campaign to achieve carbon neutrality. And Bang and Lee also started off with Act Zero as their global campaign for climate change. So let us hear from them. Hello, everyone. We are artist duo Bang and Lee. Thank you very much for inviting us to Making Lemonade 2.0 to speak about our Gathering Moss and Act Zero projects. Gathering Moss is an online digital platform that inspires art and cultural practices across the globe to fight climate change. The project won the UK-Korea Creative Commission organized by the Korea Foundation and the British Council on the occasion of the 26th United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP26, last year. In collaboration with Art Centre Nabi, the organizer of Making Lemonade, the UK's first media centre watershed, which is located in Bristol, we launched an art forming platform, which borrows the concept of terraforming. We would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who helped us communicate and collaborate remotely amid COVID restrictions. Thank you, partners, participants, and sponsors for granting support to art projects and helping us dream bigger. Also, we would like to thank the organizers of this meaningful conference for arranging today's hybrid event, which will further expand the discourse on sustainable art and giving artists an opportunity to showcase best practices. So thank you very much for organizing this conference. Gathering Moss was launched to support different creative ideas of Gen MZ creators in Korea and the UK. The platform is designed to share the entire production process of projects on climate, environment, and the future, and encourages climate action such as preventing the acceleration of climate change. And it was officially launched on November 10th, 2021. The floating islands here create a digital landscape. Going forward, a new topography of creative and innovative ideas for tackling climate emergencies will be created. Climate change is an intergenerational problem that affects the world. This is why it is essential that we, in our own ways, take climate action so that we can move toward a world of coexistence and embrace new hope. Gathering Moss is a digital map that reimagines and explores the future of mankind in the face of environmental pollution and global warming crisis. We invite you all to the Gathering Moss platform. Gathering Moss first held a creative camp for the MZ generation. The goal of the camp was to represent the voice of future generations and encourage the participation of the MZ generation. The camp was led by the partner organizations of the UK and Korea. An open call invited young artists and creators from Korea and the UK. Kwaksuwa Itanu team, Park Se-min, Choi Seung-hee team from Korea, Ines Solomon Gardner, Tom Horsey, and Heather Gibson from the UK were selected. So 5 in total. Participants exchanged creative ideas at the 5-day online creative camp held over the course of 2 weeks. Topics included microplastics and global warming, and these evolved into various forms of projects. In addition, the creative camp offered workshops and lectures by expert mentors, which sparked creative inspiration and input to the participants. Mentors included Zoe Rashbash, climate crisis behavioral researcher at Watershed, Malcolm Hamilton of Play Disrupt, Kim Ji-eun, co-chairman of Green Environment Youth Korea, British artist and curator Aidan Mosby, and Climate Citizen 3.5 CEO Lee Hae-won. Climate and environment experts from both countries were invited virtually to converse with camp participants and suggest new approaches to climate change. Discussion topics included global climate inequality and discrimination, environmental pollution and responsibility, gamified education and access, personal well-being, youth climate action and impact, and sustainable art creation. Highlights of the lectures and the virtual workshops are uploaded on the Gathering Moss platform. I hope that many people who come across the lecture find fresh inspiration. Also, please visit the website to find out more about the artists who present their own work, which was developed during the camp. On the margins of the creative camp, we launched another project to raise awareness of the climate crisis and stress on environmental recovery actions. Let us present Act Zero project, which serves as Act Zero of the campaign. Act Zero is a philosophy and motto to live by to fight climate change. Act Zero is our actions and our practices. Under the slogan of participation and solidarity, Act Zero seeks changes in art activity and creation. By engaging global citizens and internet users, the mission is to move toward carbon neutrality in everyday life. The name of the hybrid challenge is #ActZeroChallenge. Some of the short-form videos that you just watched are part of a short 3D animation series on climate change. The series was released on the Clip Drops platform operated by GroundX, a blockchain technology provider of Kakao. GroundX is a service provider that displays and distributes digital art through Clip, a digital asset wallet on KakaoTalk. These works are displayed online, and on top of this, the British Council and GroundX launched the Reduce Your Own Carbon Footprint Challenge event. 100 climate action NFT badges were given out to participants. The #ActZero Climate Action Challenge, which calls for climate action to reduce carbon in our daily lives, was held on social media platforms for about 2 weeks. The hashtag generated hundreds of posts, which proposed creative ideas, practices, and showed individual commitment to reducing carbon footprint. During the creative camp of Gathering Moss, we also prepared the Act Zero showcase and selected an iconic place that is sensitive to climate change and exposed to pollution of marine ecosystems. A Noji at Seogwipo시, Jeju-do was selected as the site. Noji means a place without walls and roofs, where nature remains intact. Sea level rise and ecological disturbance are inflicting harm on Noji, where we took the first step in climate action. Act Zero Noji is a video that features objects that disappear into the sea. These objects were created with much effort and time. It is a process art from which the non-material and alternative form of art remains as archives. The project silently calls for action by serving as a representation of global warming, disappearance of ecological culture, and human civilization on the verge of extinction. Creativity may be the most needed element to tackle climate change. It is a powerful motivator for artists as well as a useful tool. In the work process, the audio visualizing or expressing it in response to climate change, and in the production process of the manufacturing industry in the post-industrial society, we have faced many contradictions and absurd situations. In the studio for a long time, after a lot of trial and error and learning, we developed our own 3D printer called Additive Manufacturing, AM, which can print soil. 3D printed models that each symbolize different values were brought to the beach that meet the no-G. 3D printing technology is a core technology of the fourth industrial revolution and has brought about innovation in manufacturing with near zero marginal cost. It will be able to solve problems and overcome limitations in the manufacturing process of making and producing something, thereby helping us find the ideal zero-waste method. About 1.7 million years ago, an island was formed by volcanic activity during the Cenozoic era. This is a place where lava ejected from the volcano flows down to the surface, cools, and accumulates over and over to create a topography. The layered black stones are proof of such activities, with a crystal clear sea breaking waves and the wind that surrounds the area as a backdrop. White modern architectural models were placed one after the other, made of white clay and stacked in thin layers. However, the elaborately and densely stacked layers collide with the waves and wind and break and crumble powerlessly. The fragile structure is eventually submerged and disappears into the sea. So as the waves come and go, they disappeared. Although the place is still very vulnerable to climate change, we sat on the beach that is not entirely polluted and stared at the same spot for about a few hours in the presence of a small audience until everything submerged. It was a special experience, and it was definitely a moment that will last forever, although fleeting. If Act Zero succeeds in raising awareness of the climate crisis through such visual storytelling and recording of experiences, if it becomes a small wave in driving change in environmental awareness and behavior, it will be able to present fresh perspectives in overcoming the dilemma of existing land art or environmental art. Going forward, by taking Act Zero actions, we will continue to build on the series of creative, carbon-neutral art activities and practices that focus on sustainable materials, eco-friendly energy, local eco-culture to ultimately return to nature. All participants of Gathering Moss intend to create a hybrid ecosystem by serving as a catalyst for action for the environment and ecology, both online and offline. We will continue to offer creative ideas and proposals to solve the current climate crisis and global warming that humanity is facing. I hope that it will serve as an opportunity for all of us to ponder on how we can act by relying on the ideas suggested by artists who dream of a more hopeful future than now and encourage participation and solidarity. Discover the work of young artists who want to make a positive change in the real world on our website. Thank you.
Yes, so that was Bang and Lee's presentation. So many artists around the world got together to think about solutions to climate change. So we are going to listen more during the Q&A session. Next presentation will be by Mr. Joanie Lemercier from France, titled Digital Arts, NFTs, and Sustainability. When you think about digital arts and NFTs, you may feel that it's not very much related with environmental issues or climate change, because when you purchase NFT, the Ethereum, when you excavate them or mine them, that actually has an impact on the environment. So Mr. Joanie Lemercier is going to talk also about activism. So let's
Hello, everyone.
have him on screen.
Thank you so much for having me. I miss South Korea a lot, and I'm really glad to be here with you today. This presentation about my artistic practice and about NFTs is usually quite long. So I'm going to try to put everything in a short version. So bear with me if this feels a bit dense or messy. I'm going to try to go through 15 minutes. So I hope you can still see my, my shared screen. I was just saying that I started projection mapping and my practice as an artist in my bedroom. I would use a video projector to light up origamis. And I thought that was really magical, the way with like a very simple technological device with a projector, you could really very precisely highlight simple geometric shapes or change the way they look. You could project different colors, different types of light, different textures. So you could almost change the way people see reality. I was very lucky with my colleagues from NTVJ to travel around the world. And we were invited to New Songdo city to do a projection mapping on a facade. And it was actually with Nabi Art Center. So it was my first trip to South Korea, and it was really an incredible experience. I'm very lucky to work also with heritage, with beautiful castles and churches. And it's really, really special when you're being asked to do a project in such space. This organ in Breda in the Netherlands has been dismantled twice during the war. So using it as a canvas for projection was very, very special. So we had to do a lot of research about the history of the cathedral, about the history of the place to make a meaningful projection. I also do a lot of installations. So not just projecting on the architecture, but creating a structure, creating architectures and spaces as a canvas for projection of light. I will discuss a little later how my work is very monochromatic. It's very black and white. It's a little bit dry and dark. Develop later. A lot of my inspiration comes from dystopian films and science fiction from the 90s. That's why a lot of my work used to be very sort of super technological, like this projection in midair. It felt like controlling a hologram. It's not a real hologram, of course, but this idea of being able to project in midair was for me something very, very exciting. I spent a lot of my time in like super technological spaces. This place in Manchester is actually it's a cave. It's a research space where you can have projections all around you, on the floor, but also all around the walls. And you can also wear 3D glasses. So everything you see is stereoscopic. So you can almost create a new version of reality. And here is a picture of my friend Kyle McDonald and myself. We did this residency in the very middle of this super hyper technological space. Now I'm going to skip forward outside the sort of technology into nature, because nature is a very important topic in my work. And I'm very interested in those sublime landscapes, especially the desertic ones. This is a desert in the Nevada in the US. I do a lot of hiking, and I was lucky enough to be able to go on Fujisan, on the top of Mount Fuji in Japan. And when I come back from those trips, from those hikes, then I try to make artworks about those landscapes. So this piece is called Fuji, and it's a projection of light on two walls. And I'm actually enhancing a drawing that is made on the wall. Here you can see a different piece on the same technique. It's called Eyjafjallajökull. It's the Icelandic volcano that erupted in 2010, and I made a work about it. So here you can see a lot of landscapes I've been working on, and again, I think there's a sense of beauty, there's a sense of sublime, because you can't really tell what the scale is. But it's also very a little bit dystopian. I would say, maybe I could say very dystopian, because I believe those science fiction films and films like Mad Max really influenced me when I was younger, especially the aesthetics part. So now I'm going to skip to a new part of my life and new part of my work. It's about the largest coal mine of Europe. And actually, this is the real landscape that it's 1 hour and a half from my studio. I think I'm back again, hopefully. Yes, sorry. So the Ambar coal mine is actually the largest source of CO2 emissions in Europe. And I use a drone to document this coal mine. And what you see here is the largest machine on the planet. It's 200 meters long and it's 100 meters tall. And every single day, 270,000 tons of CO2 are emitted from this place. The coal is extracted from the soil and then is burned in the coal power plant nearby. And one of the externalities of coal mining is also the destruction of villages and the destruction of communities and churches. Here you can see the village of Imerat, which is just next to the coal mine. And you can see here this, the church of Imerat being destroyed. And I'm showing you those images because I believe the dystopian aesthetics was really beautiful and was a little bit quite appealing to me as an aesthetic. But then I realized that this dystopian world of Mad Max is actually happening and feels more like reality. Here is a map of all the coal mines and power plants in Europe. So you can imagine I was really shocked when I discovered this place. And as an artist using technology and using electricity, a lot of electricity, I wanted to respond, to do something about it. So I will show you now in a few minutes, over a few minutes, my responses to this discovery. So I did an audit of my electricity consumption at the studio. And then now I'm trying every year to lower it down by 10%. I stopped flying, I stopped traveling around the world, and I'm really tracking all my electricity consumptions. I'm going to skip through, I don't want to be too long. So another thing I'm doing is activism. So I'm helping activists to block coal mines and to try to directly go to this coal mine to sort of stop the emissions by blocking the machines. I also use projections for activism. So I support groups like Extinction Rebellion that you can see here. I help them to do this projection on Buckingham Palace in London. And I try to help creating images around this Extinction Rebellion logo, but also other groups, as you can see here. You can follow my activist work on this website, Climate Action. It's a newsletter. So before talking briefly about NFTs, I'm going to explain how my model as an artist using technology is based on hyper-production. Do now is we try to have fewer works that can tour around the world without us traveling. So now let's come to NFTs very briefly. I believe as a visual artist, I can also sell and show some work as NFTs. It would be very difficult to get into details, but basically the NFT allows an artist to sell a specific digital file. So the file cannot be copied or duplicated so easily. You can tell who the owner is. So yeah, NFTs are very complex, but I tried making NFTs last year, and I started making this series. And what I didn't realize is that using the Ethereum blockchain is really, really power intensive. And here on this graph, you can see my electricity consumption at the studio and over 1 year. And the point you can see up there is the amount of electricity needed to release NFTs. So basically, in doing one release of NFTs, it consumed more than 2 years equivalent of electricity at the studio. So I was really shocked because Ethereum blockchain and NFTs and blockchains in general, they rely on fossil fuel. So you can find a lot of statistics about how a single Ethereum transactions emits about 150 kilos of CO2, and it's going up very fast. So for me, it was very alarming to see that NFTs were actually increasing emissions for artists. So I wanted to do something about it. I'm going to skip the part about techno-optimism. I believe solutions like carbon offset, carbon capture, and carbon credits are not very real solutions. I believe they are just like excuses to not act. So if you want to do NFTs more ethically, actually you can find a lot of platforms for NFTs that are much cleaner. So here on cleannfts.org, you can find a lot of alternatives. And there are plenty of alternatives today. With my partner, Juliette Bibas, we made this project, thefen.io, where a lot of artists joined us to do ethical NFTs. I'm so sorry I'm speaking fast for the translator, but this is coming to the end of this short presentation. So here are some alternatives to make clean NFTs. So what you should keep in mind is that Ethereum is very bad, so don't use it. And there are plenty of alternatives for generative arts, like this website. And personally, I keep making physical works and I release them as NFT.
네, 저희 작가님께서 해외.
So our artist is based abroad, and I believe that we have some technical difficulties in terms of communication. And yet, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation about NFT, digital art, and sustainability, and the link between all these three. So do you think that we'll be able to proceed? Continue? Unfortunately, we would not be able to listen to the last part of the presentation. Sorry for these technical difficulties. Moving on.
Now we will hear from an artist in Denmark. Mr. Stefan Kaegi will present. And he will present about remote-controlled audiences and absent guests. And he has joined us on Zoom. The floor is yours.
Hello. I'm very happy to be with you in South Korea. I'm not in Denmark, actually, but in Switzerland. I am part of the Berlin-based company Rimini Protocol. And we've been just in Korea actually recently with a work which talks very much about the challenges of climate change to come in the future. It was exhibited in Busan in the Museum of Contemporary Art. And I will just show some pictures. Yes. Here you go. So this is Rimini Protocol, our company. And the work in Busan, it was called Win-Win. And it's a project where we worked in a kind of an immersive way in the exhibition space. The audience would sit on these chairs and would get an audio feed. In the beginning, they look at something round, which is just like a mirror. But then gradually light changes and gives way to an aquarium that is behind it, where jellyfish are swimming. And why jellyfish? Jellyfish are expected to be the winners of climate change. They can adapt very easily to different temperatures. They can be happy when there are less fish in the sea, and they are happy when there are more algae, which is their food source. And we wondered, how can we learn from these winners of climate change, who are actually also very beautiful. I just show a little video excerpt for you to give a bit of an idea what the audience sees.
When you look at a jellyfish, they're these spineless, brainless animals. You know, they just pulsate through the water on instinct with no intention. People, on the other hand, you look at us, we stand upright, we have faces, we smile, we laugh, you know, we feel, and we could not possibly be farther apart, we humans, from the incredibly primitive jellyfish.
Human beings are much more dangerous than jellyfish.
And at this point, it's not very visible in the video. You see something that looks like a mirror of the people that are on this side of the mirror, but actually the light changes again, and you see people on the other side behind the aquarium. This is like the next generation, because they have entered a different door into the installation. And so I'll just paraphrase a little bit, but kind of you understand every 7 minutes the audience inside the room change, and you start to understand that you always leave something behind for others, because the people entering in the room next to you will then be the next generation for the ones following it in your room, and the audios on both sides relate to each other, and in the middle there are these jellyfish. For us, a challenge as a theater company, although this was a museum piece, we normally try to really work in real spaces, not in virtual reality. So it normally would mean produce a lot of CO2 when we travel with our works. This is why last year we tried to invent some new projects where we don't need to travel for. One of them is the Conference of the Absent. It's a conference bring together protagonists from different places like Somalia, Portland, Ohio, Yakutia, or Greece, but they don't travel. They also don't appear on a screen as I do right now, but they do appear locally through what we call performative telepresence. How this looks, you can see in a little trailer here, where you will see people going on stage, and they are all just audience that came to the theater and has decided to incorporate the people who are not there by different means.
Sie befinden sich heute auf der Konferenz der Abwesenden. Wir benötigen nun eine Vertretung für den ersten Konferenzbeitrag. Wer will den ersten Beitrag vorlesen? Sie können diese Chance ergreifen und in die Haut der Protagonistinnen und Protagonisten schlüpfen. Ohne sie wird heute nichts passieren.
Ich heiße Tamara. Mein richtiger Körper ist der einer Frau.
Ich bin Nicolas D. Und als Banker habe ich Geschäfte mit der Cum-Ex-Methode gemacht. Eine Sauerei, sagen Sie? Es ist keine Straftat, sagt mein Anwalt.
Man könnte mich einen Experten für die Abwesenheit von Gerechtigkeit nennen. Aber noch viel mehr bin ich ein Experte für das, was wir hier gerade tun, für das Vertreten.
Hier und heute steuerte ich sogar ein ganzes Publikum fern. Das bringt mich ein Stück ins Leben zurück.
So in the beginning, you saw basically people stepping on stage and starting to read the text of the people who are not there, while behind them, PowerPoint presentations unfold, and later light changes and it gets more and more dramatic, but also some of the audience stepping into the roles of the people who therefore don't need to travel tens of thousands of kilometers to perform. For instance, in Korea, where we're going to show this work in October, they also sometimes get prompted through in-ear monitors where they just repeat the text that is written or spoken by the people, and therefore they can also speak in the local languages. They will be speaking and performing in Korean in Korea, as they have been speaking Spanish or Portuguese, where we just performed in Lisbon 3 weeks ago. The topic is
Mein Ticket für den
absence.
Trip in die Abwesenheit kostet 50 Millionen Euro. Und ich denke, das ist es wert.
Wie steht es um Verpflegung, Munition, Benzin? Von wem in der Armeeführung ist bekannt, dass er korrupt ist?
Wer von Ihnen möchte, dass ich den Umschlag Nummer 1 Dieselskandal öffne?
So the audience themselves becomes the central part of this performance, and the topic is really absence in its most different ways. Absence because of not traveling, but also absence because of phantom pain of a part of your body.
Wir sollten verschwinden. Ein sanfter Abschied.
Sie, die Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, haben heute die Gelegenheit, zu Darstellerinnen und Darstellern zu werden. Zu Vertreterinnen und Vertretern für die Abwesenden.
Yeah, so also expertise on absence because of refugees that cannot be present is a topic. The whole idea of mobility is in a way questioned. And we're just adapting this project for the Performing Arts Festival in Korea, where in October we will be performing it. And obviously some topics have to be re-evaluated, but most importantly, every day new performers will perform this stage without having rehearsed before, and therefore impersonate these characters. And the last example I would like to quickly talk about, where we created a work that is very performative, but that allows you to see it, to perform it yourself wherever you are, because it's basically an app that is called The Walks. And it does already, as you can see, exist in English, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, French. Unfortunately, not yet in Korean. We'll see. Maybe that comes later. And it's a series, actually, of audio tours that allow you for half an hour to kind of fictionalize your own environments in 9 different locations. For instance, in around a pedestrian light, in a supermarket, or in a park, in a roundabout. But they're not made for one specific roundabout or one specific cemetery, but you choose the one where you want it to be. For instance, Playground is an audio tour of about 30 minutes that you can perform or see or witness or use in actually 2 people together can do it. And then I won't tell more about this tour. I think you have to live it, as once you've downloaded it, you will find a playground somewhere in your Korean neighborhood, maybe. While you're doing at some point this tour, you will also take a picture and upload it. So that allows us to see it all, who is living this experience where. Here are some documents, for instance, from playgrounds around London or in Milano, Colorado Springs. Somebody has performed this audio tour, or this is the cemetery audio tour. Cemeteries have very different connotations and looks all around the world. That's what we also found out here in Paris. I don't know who made this, just actually in last October here in Italy, in Riga, in Latvia, in Chile, in Santiago, Helsinki, Berlin, Austria, and Switzerland. And actually, you as well can visit this performance. You just download from your App Store or Google Play Store the app, The Walks, and you will have to activate it by buying a little, I think it's a €3. I don't know how much it will be in Korean. And then you can see it, at least in English so far. its local version. I think many hundreds of people have already experienced this performance without anybody needing to fly anywhere, and still connecting to you really in a physical ways to the space, because I think theater should remain a place where we immerse ourselves with all our senses, and it can only, in very few exceptional cases, be streamed online and be purely digitized, even for good purposes. Thank you. I'm looking forward to see you at the Conference of the Absent in Seoul in end of October this year.
So that was a Danish artist, Stefan Kaegi. So after all the presentations about artists, we're going to have a Q&A session. So those of you who are joining us on YouTube, please leave your questions or comments on the chat menu. And everyone who is participating on site, please leave your questions on the open chat room of Making Lemonade. Now, the last presentation will be done by Ms. Anna Kim.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Let's see. My name is Anna Kim, and I'm a multimedia artist, as well as a senior researcher at the Korea Research Institute for Culture and Technology, as part of the Gwangju Institute of Science and Technology. The project that I will be speaking about today is a project called Invisible Cities, OPIM. And the title comes from a novel by Italo Calvino of the same name, Invisible Cities, which was published in 1972. The book consists of imaginary conversations between the explorer Marco Polo and the Emperor Kublai Khan of the Mongol Empire. And Marco Polo, in the book, Marco Polo explains his visits and describes the cities that he has visited, roughly about 55 cities that are fantastical and imaginary stories. But the book itself is not, it's a fiction. It's an imaginary travelogue to places that do not exist. And something that's very interesting about this book is the fact that Calvino is pointing to the exact kind of historical moment when the Pandora box of globalization is being cracked open, right, through Western colonial expansion. And all the kind of desires and fantasies that are involved with that expansion as well. And if we forward to today, fast forward to the kind of impact that the pandemic has had on us, I think, ironically, the pandemic has emphasized the aspects of globalization more than ever before. I'm sure everybody can relate to, especially during the beginning of the pandemic, looking at the kind of like the updated world map of how the virus was spreading across national borders, boundaries, and in terms of the number of infectees and also the number of deaths, etc. So this kind of concept of our planet as a whole and us as Earthlings, I think has taken shape more concretely in the recent turn of events more than ever. So So kind of going along with, similar to the theme of this conference, lemonade, making lemonade through lemons, we wanted to, with the limitations, the physical limitations of lockdowns and social distancing, etc., we wanted to envision an alternative way for artists to come together and work together across geographical boundaries, through network technology. Right? So in essence, OPIM is a real-time mixed reality performance that can be experienced through multiple platforms, through the collaboration among artists of various genres. Our work process was like that of the game of Exquisite Corpse, which is a surrealist game where the work gets passed on to the next, and then it kind of creates a chain of production in a way. And this kind of surrealism or surrealistic sensibility was very important to us because not only for the structure of the project, but also thematically, the fact that we were currently living through reality that seemed stranger than fiction in a way. So we incorporated kind of surrealistic sensibilities into the project as a whole. And we wanted an open and fluid process where we could inspire each other rather than one individual dictating a coherent whole per se. So initially it began with a short story written by a sci-fi writer, Shim Noor, titled Virtual Love, which is a kind of like a very quirky story about networked alien love through augmented reality. And Noel's narrative inspired the construction of the virtual environment and the three characters that you see the images of, which consisted of a double cyborg, a light man, and a TV guy. And then these together informed the choreographer, the composer, and lastly, an architect who designed the environment for the space where the first showcase was held. So the first rendition of OPIM, or Invisible Cities, was held in Korea, in Seoul, Korea. But the premise of the project or the platform is for artists of multiple geographies to be able to work together through network technology. Right. In the first showcase rendition, the exhibition space was divided into 3 parts. The live performance area, where the dancer with the motion capture suit resides and performs live. And the next area consists of a VR area where audience can experience the piece through VR HND headsets. And lastly, there was a projection room where OPIM was projected onto walls in a theater-type setting. Before I show you the video kind of documentation of the project, I do want to emphasize, as you have probably witnessed through all these different projects that are being introduced tonight, even that how important artistic narratives are to any type of difficulties, societal political difficulties that we have. And it could be, I'm probably preaching to the choir, of course, but I think the alternative narratives that are made available through creative endeavors, I think mark or is really shown through the difficult times that we're having as a society. So here is the video. Thank you.
시작하겠습니다.
Yes, so we just watched the artwork of Miss Anna Kim. I now have next to me Bang and Lee, Miss Anna Kim, and we are joined by Mr. Lemercier and Mr. Kaegi. We will now move on to the Q&A session. But before we begin the Q&A session, I have one announcement to make. As for Mr. Stefan Kaegi, I said Denmark, but I was wrong. He's from Germany. And he is a artist from Rimini Protocol. So I would like to, again, correct myself. Now, moving on to the Q&A session. If you're participating in this conference, you can leave your questions here, but we already received some of the questions from the audience. So should we hear from the audience, or how should we conduct the session? I think we will ask a few questions here and then give the floor to the audience. So Bang and Lee, thank you very much for the presentation. And I would like to ask some of the questions to Bang and Lee. And you talked about the Gathering Moss project, which crossed borders. And you meet with many different artists and you have many exchanges with global artists and art figures. So I'm sure that you share many perspectives or attitudes towards sustainability and climate change. So were there any common or transnational agenda that you shared with them? Were there any? Well, we would like to redirect that question to the curator of Art Center Nabi. In fact, if I share my experience, well, I think that we all agree that climate change is an urgent issue, but how to translate that into art and artwork? Well, that's not an easy question. Maybe because we have different ideas and it's hard to converge on those ideas. So that was my impression. And we usually focus on visual art. And the problems of visual art, for instance, carbon generation and the way we produce and make materials, we really thought a lot about how to improve that. But at the end of the day, we have different artists all across the globe, and they have different perspectives and different ideas. So we were able to share that, and we were able to kind of get off on a first foot. So how to utilize the digital environment and digital media to combat the urgent climate crisis. Of course, that was not easy, but at least we were able to agree on some points. Yes. So when all the artists got together, I think that the sense of urgency was similar. The way we regard climate change, how we treat this agenda, and how we feel about the role of artists in dealing with climate change. I think we all had similar views, but we were situated in different locations and different circumstances. Of course it is different because artists in Korea, well, we have a different sense of urgency compared to artists in London, far away from Korea. So, of course, our attitudes can be different given the circumstances. And Art Center Nabi and Watershed came together for this project, and the objective was this. It was to raise the awareness of the next generation, the MZ generation artists. So, well, as a more aged person and a more experienced person, we have our own views. But what about the young generation? Maybe the way they feel towards the climate crisis is more relevant today. So we wanted to hear them out. We wanted to hear their inputs. And as we are creators, it was a great opportunity to learn from them. Yes, thank you very much for the answer. So you talked about the different generations and different countries that led to different ideas. And we received one question from the audience, so I would like to ask that question. You talked about the NFT badge of Bang & Lee during your presentation. How do we use that badge? And how do we distribute that? Can you give us more details about that badge? That was the prize for the challenge. And carbon neutrality and reducing carbon footprint were some of the themes of the challenge. It was about making your own pledge and commitment. It was about encouraging the internet users, and it led to the selection of some of the winners. So 100 badges were issued, and we could not give that to everyone, and we could not issue more badges. So it was just 100, limited to 100. And the British Council selected the winners, and they sent that already to the winners. But we have another event coming up, and it was the first notion of a climate badge. And without the support of ground eggs, nothing would have been possible. And we plan to have more campaigns this year, so please stay tuned. Yes, thank you very much. So the NFT badge that the artist talked about, you can no longer receive those badges, but more campaigns are coming up. So stay tuned. Yes, thank you very much for that. Now moving on to the last question to Bang & Lee. And then I will ask questions to Ms. Anna Kim. Now, you said that from the early days, you presented interesting concepts of media art, and you actually offered criticism about cutting-edge technology as well. But now you shifted that focus to the environment. What was the motivation behind that? Well, I would like to give you the answer for that. As Professor Kwak of Sungsil University mentioned, I think that it's all connected. I started off as a media artist, and back then, perspectives of technology was something that I really focused on, how to convey my perspective to the audience and the visitors to the museum. So it's not just about being future-oriented, it's not just about utopian future, it's not about this cutting-edge technology. I just wanted to be very clear about the pros and cons of technology, and to be very open about those aspects. And I began as a media artist, and I have a long career as a media artist. But now, the society is driven by technology, and when you see the advent of such a society, you are excited to see new technologies. It's like reading a new sci-fi novel. Now, I believe that we need to shift our perspective to how to use these technologies, what roles they can play. So now we printed out the buildings or structures, and then they disappeared into the sea. And as we watched that scene, it was about what we can do as artists, what performance we can do. Of course, we used new technology to print that out. It's top edge, cutting edge technology that was applied. And it was a sort of smart factory process that was applied to our work. But the message was how to return to nature. It's not about fissure of nuclear material, but it's about how to go back to nature. So that should be the role of the artist. So it's not just about showing the technology, but about showing what the technology can do for us. And that's the role of the artists. Yes, thank you very much.
Moving on, I would like to ask a few questions to Anna Kim. So my first question is the following. So there are lots of projects involving the motive of virtual, like human. So, and there's augmented reality, robots, and IoT. So all of these technologies have enabled us to become more closer to virtual humans. So how should we deal with these virtual humans? What should be our attitude vis-a-vis them? Is some of the discussions taking place? But we cannot really think about a clear answer to that question. So in this situation, Anna, how do you think we should perceive virtual humans? What are your take on that?
Wow, what a loaded question. 되게 부럽네요. 두 분이 계시니까 같이 답을 할 수 있는데.
Yes, I envy Bang and Lee because you're two. I'm the only one.
죄송합니다. 제가 한국말, 영어 뒤죽박죽을 해서. But I will just answer in English. Well, I think artificial intelligence is it's a fascinating topic for a lot of people, especially for artists these days. And as an artist who has been producing kind of recent projects that involve the technology of artificial intelligence, I guess one thing that I want to point out or emphasize is the fact that a lot of artificial intelligence technology that is currently used is based on the database that is built on human activity. So that's why in AI technology, you run into a lot of problems with AI biases and a lot of problematic kind of utterances or iterations that are reflections of human psyche, I guess, or human civilization or our society in general. So in that sense, I don't think we think of AI, well, at least not these days, like, well, maybe like in the far future when we have reached the point of like singularity and it has become like a completely alien entity or something. But right now, I think it just represents another kind of a collective psyche of ourselves in a way. So it's a reflection of ourselves rather than an alien entity. That's kind of how I would like to think of it. So in exploring AI, I think the idiosyncrasies of AI technology, what's interesting to me is that it brings up or exposes the problematics that we as humans have in our societal structure.
And in your presentation, I would like to actually ask one more question regarding your presentation. So in your project that you talked about today, so it was inspired by the virtual love of Simnaul, the short story of Simnaul, but it was also inspired by the novel of Calvino, The Invisible Cities. So this means that your project was inspired by Shim, but Shim was inspired by Calvino. So it seems like a lot of things, a lot of stories are intermingled in your actually project. But were there times when your ideas or concepts were a little bit different from what Calvino and Sim had in mind? Were there any conflicts of ideas or perspectives?
I guess as my presentation was really, really short, so I feel like I didn't explain much about the project in a way, so I apologize for that. But one aspect of the project, or one key component of the project, is to operate from the kind of like the game of Exquisite Corpse, which is a surrealist game where where the work is passed on to the next member in a way, next participant, and it's like kind of just passed along, right? So instead of this kind of coherent, I don't know, like head figure that controls everything, I think what was exciting about the project is the kind of the act of passing on and releasing control in a way. That it doesn't need to be a coherent narrative per se. It can, and in a way, I think that represents our more contemporary understanding of our globalization or the global model, that we don't need to have this one global village that is, you know, like homogenous and has like one big world vision per se, but you have these different compartments, and as individual parts, you have the right to exist as individual parts, and not necessarily intermingling, and then so you can still hold on to the individuality or individuation, but still come together to consist of a larger part. And I think that's what structurally something that we wanted to explore through this project.
네, 안나킴 작가님 답변.
Thank you, Anna, for your question. Now, moving on to our international artists joining us from Zoom. So we have Joanie. So because of the connection and technical difficulties, we could not hear the ending part of your presentation. Would you like to briefly end the presentation or share us some wrap-up comments?
Sure. Let's try. I'm really sorry about the bad connection, but if I cut again, it shouldn't be longer than 5 or 10 seconds. It was really the end of the presentation. I was wrapping up with those stills, saying that I make physical drawings, and I also distribute them as NFTs on the Tezos blockchain, which is not as polluting. I also mint code as NFTs. So here I can distribute my projection mapping pieces as NFTs on Tezos. And this was basically the final slides where I'm showing a few recent works, and I distribute also projection works as NFTs. I think it's an interesting way to distribute works without traveling. And what Stefan was showing earlier with the
네, 오늘 인터넷 연결 환경이 좋지 않으신 것 같습니다.
I believe that the connection is lost. So maybe you can continue with your words, just words.
Yeah, it was just actually the final slide, and I was saying that with NFTs or with creative approaches, I think we can, as artists, distribute works while reducing our travel CO2 emissions and our footprint. So what Rimini Protocol is doing doing a performance without actually going. I think it's really, really inspiring, and I hope to see more artists finding like very creative ways of reducing travel, but showing more works. I think that's for me, that's very meaningful to see other putting so much effort in reducing their footprint.
Yes. So we're pressed with time, so we have to move on to the next Q&A with another artist. So unfortunately, we will stop our conversation with Joanie here and then continue our conversation with Stefan.
So with your work, you have been delivering the message of sustainability. And when delivering that message to the audience, any difficulties you have?
Well, actually, we're not delivering messages. I don't believe that audience can be taught. I think audience has to find out by themselves. We're trying to bring them together with complex facts that are out there, and in the end, people will need to find out themselves. For instance, we created a big World Climate Conference simulation in Schauspielhaus Hamburg, and there we invited audience to incorporate 196 different delegations that come together every year for the United Nations Summit on Climate Change. And obviously the visions about what needs to be changed are very different around the world. And I think it's also very important to understand each position there. And therefore the audience really incorporated these delegations during 3 hours. But I think for us, other than messages, I think we also stand in a way for examples. So I think we can try to establish a new cohabitation on the planet with the non-human parts of this world. That's where some of our work is going, and then we have to look at ourselves and about our practices, as Joanie was also explaining it, to understand where can we really very simply on ourselves be an example by reducing our carbon footprint. And not all can be submitted to this. I think there may be things, when we meet in a place like the conference that is happening right now, we do produce CO2. A Zoom meeting is energy consuming, but still we have the chance to innovate in some fields, these sites, but without losing totally the human side of meetings. In some moments, it's really important to step away from the computer as well.
Then I have another question, a follow-up question for you. Now we have different artists here in person and also artists that have connected virtually. And you are working on different work on the topic of sustainability. Any messages that you would like to send to other artists working on sustainability? Stefan, this is a follow-up question to you.
Sorry, I thought this was kind of to everybody. Do I have messages to send to the other artists? Well, I guess try to be innovative about the formats. I think as soon as we reproduce formats that have been there all the time without reflecting them, I think they might be outdated. And let's not be afraid to look into working with technologies that haven't been there, as long as they have a certain meaning, and be self-critical, if I can be as vague as that. My messages are mostly vague, so I think stay yourselves and stay healthy.
Yes, thank you very much.
And to Joanie, there was one question asked for you, and that will be the last question for this Q&A. So through your works and blogs and postings, so you have sent a lot of messages about the environment. So you have been calling for a lot of action on climate issues. So what are the key to these actions that we can take?
Sorry, I just missed the question. Sorry. What was the question again? I had a micro cut. Okay, what are the keys to the action I suggest? Well, I would say from a very personal perspective, I'm not asking everyone to do this, but I started being part of climate actions. So helping groups like Extinction Rebellion, Friday for Future, that was started by Greta Thunberg, and the Gelände in Germany. I would love to see more artists, those maybe who are interested in those topics and in direct action, to join those groups, maybe to practice civil disobedience and to maybe start opposing the fossil fuel industry. Of course, everyone can help in his or her own levels by doing different things, but I believe there's a lot of space in direct action. And civil disobedience, I think, is one way to stop the sort of extractive capitalism, the colonialism ideology. So that would be my my advice or my help. Like, join us if you want to join like local groups. There are a lot of things we can do locally together with our own skills.
Thank you very much for that answer. So this brings us to the end of our Q&A with the artists. Thank you very much, all our artists, for your active participation. Thank you.
네, 함께 해주신
Yes,
패널
thank you
분들과
very much,
현장
panelists,
관객분들께
and thank you very
감사의
much,
말씀
audience,
다시
for your
한번 드립니다.
participation.
이제 오늘 데이 1의 쇼케이스가
Now,
종료되었는데요.
the showcase one of
뒤이어서
day one
프랑스
has come to an
작가인 스테판
end.
페로의 퍼포먼스 공연이
we'll see a
진행될
performance
예정입니다.
from Stefan
간단히
Perraud,
시작에 앞서서 소개
a
말씀을
French
조금
artist.
드리자면요. 스테판
And allow
페로는
me to
뉴미디어
briefly
등 첨단
introduce
기술을
the
활용한
artist.
작업을
The artist
선보이는
uses new media
작가님이십니다.
and cutting-edge
감지할 수 없는
technology.
현상과 인간 사이의 대화를 주제로 그간
And he
작품을
works on
선보여
dialogue
왔는데요.
between
오늘
imperceptible
선보일
phenomenon and
작품도 같은
humankind.
맥락을
And
담고 있습니다.
today's work
혹시
will
여러분들
also
숲속이라
send the same message. When you're in a forest or amidst the nature, have you ever focused on the sound that nature gives you? You feel like meditating and you feel very calm. And the artist traveled to the forest of Jura in France to create an immersive deep time story. And this is a liberating experience for the audience. And according to scientists, 50% of nature's sounds will disappear in 50 years. And even as we speak, sounds of the nature is disappearing. And Sylvia is an anticipation work allowing audiences to focus on the loss of natural sounds. And I would like to ask the audience here in person and present virtually to stay quiet for the performance. The performance will last around 15 minutes, and with the performance, we will wrap up day 1 and we will resume with day 2 program at 6 p.m. tomorrow. And you can also join us on YouTube, and you can also join us in person. So please come back tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.